Hello everyone and welcome to the new episode of Undercards for the smallest ones. So I've taken a little break and now I'm finally back, and I've decided to start with something like an explanation how to react to the huge patch and how to estimate all the cards in here. Of course, there are usually two patches a month. One is huge with some new content, and the other one is mid-season patch, which pretty much fixes all the issues with the patch and adds something different, something new. So the first patch is usually huge and the second one is pretty small, and it doesn't need that much consideration. However, patch at the start of the season pretty much defines what you will be playing, defines which decks will be better, will be of better use, will be stronger, so you have to read everything, look through it carefully, and I'm going to give you an example how you are usually doing this. So we'll start with new cards. Of course, new cards are usually pretty hard to estimate at the very start of the season, but once some time passed and I actually played them, I can tell you which are good, which are bad, and why they are good or bad. But let's just imagine this is the start of the season, and I'll be describing these cards as if I haven't played them yet. Okay, so the first card, that is not a joke card, is this one. This is 1 gold 2/2, or 1 gold that summons a 1/1 token. It's actually a very good card, and I'd say that it is a very strong card, it's even an impressive card, and it's really a zoo fuel or like aggro fuel, and I can tell you that we are going to play this in our very cheap bravery, like budget bravery, but for real this is not that strong as expected, and this is much weaker than expected, and it can be easily replaced with anything of 2 cost and without any harm to the deck itself. Anyways, nice aggro fuel. Moving on to the next card, it is Lancer Bike, which is also a cheap card. Pretty good stats for the effect, which is give to random monsters in your hand +1 attack. If we are given this attack, that means we are playing something very, very cheap, such as aggro, such as Zoo, and I really saw this in somewhere outside of bravery, but I can't tell you that it's good in there. However, in bravery it takes a solid place, good for sure, so we are taking this and going to the next one. This is this one, new Megosp, and it's actually very impressive considering the stats and the effect. However, it turned out to be not that good, and the reason for this is it is just a beta lamp, like a lamp that can attack, but the truth is the lamp wasn't played that much in bravery because it's just weak in there. And this card is also pretty nice, it can be played, but it's not for bravery for sure, and I don't know if any other aggro can exist outside of bravery, because any soul just doesn't support this playstyle. So we'll skip this joke cards and move on to Leggy TV. Leggy TV is a very interesting card, because it has pretty decent stats, it has a very strong effect, and I can tell you that I thought about it as a very strong card, and it turned out to be pretty strong. And the best thing about it is we can build a very cheap deck both in dust and in gold, just around this card, and it's really a lot of fun, a lot of value, and that's a very good card. Of course, not for tier 1 decks, but it's pretty decent. So the next card that is not a joke card is Cool Vulcan. Cool Vulcan is just a filler. It was considered from the very beginning to be a filler, and it turned out to be a filler, mostly because it deals damage, and deal damage card got booped out of existence, mostly because of the change we'll be discussing later. But for now, without reading the next change, I would say it's pretty average, and it turned out to be completely awful, not playable. Skip and go next. Mom Slime. For the cost, 4/4 is already pretty weak. Okay, it's haste, which makes it a bit better, but the turn end part is with some restriction. And the restriction is not attacking with a haste monster, which is straight away stupid. We have a 6 gold for 6 lemon bread haste, which is much better. We have something like Forest Worm, which is 3/7 or 4/7 when it effect triggers. So I told it from the very beginning that it's pretty weak, and it turned out to be weak as expected. Of course, it may have some use cases, but it's not played anywhere right now, so we just skip it and go to the next non-Joe card. And that's probably this card, to be honest. It's really not that stupid, not that fun. It's just a pretty solid card, like solid in stats, but in reality its effect is just not worth its cost, and the stats are pretty low as well, so I can't tell you this is a very good cut, and moreover it is epic cut, an epic cut, and we are playing on a very low level account, so we won't be able even to afford this. And I have to tell you that I opened all my season packs, and there was 0 epics and 0 legendaries in there, so I got pretty much trolled by the game. So I won't be playing very expensive decks this season, expensive in dust I mean. And now we are moving to a more interesting part, which is changes. New cards are usually easier to describe, to estimate, because they have their cost, their HP, their effect, and you can already predict their use case. But for changes it's a bit different, and it's actually a lot harder. First of all, I'd like to share my personal experience about all the changes made in Undercards, and it's usually this way. The changes made in Undercards are usually made on HP, attack and cost. Of course we have also changes for effects, but those are revoke, and those are a lot different than all the buffs and nerfs. So when the card is unplayable, useless, not used anywhere except for maybe some Copper 4 decks, when that card is changed by +1 attack or +1 HP, that still means it's unplayable and it's pretty easy to predict. Of course that doesn't concern the cards that are lower in cost than 4 gold, because for cards from 1 to 4 gold, one stat change may be very significant, but for cards like this one and even this one, despite the fact that it's a 2 cost card, the change didn't make it more playable, because it is a plant and plants are dead. But sometimes, if the card is already not that bad, have a very strong effect, some quality of life change may make it a lot more playable and a lot better, and it may result in the card having more use cases. The more interesting changes are usually cost changes. When the cost of the card is decreased, that means that the card has more use cases in some cheap decks, in some Zoo decks, in some aggro decks. For instance, this card, the Throne, its cost got decreased, and it got decreased by 2, not by 1, which is really a significant change, and Throne became a really nice combo card, a card for some, combo decks, and it actually got some use cases outside very strange integrity, like legend spam decks. It got its use cases. It's 3 gold 2/4 draw, which is nice everywhere. So this change is an example of good buffs, and at the same time we have this one, which is like a joke, and of course, even if this was an intended change and it was a real change, it would still be pretty bad, because it doesn't simply do anything. So we have something like these changes, which are nice, and something like these changes, which are pretty much filler changes. And yeah, I have to tell you that that's general thing in Undercards. That's same for almost all the patches. So you should concentrate your attention on something which is cost changes and very significant HP and attack changes. So now let's try to predict how these changes will affect a certain card. This change will not affect anything. This change will make the card more playable, make it more usable, so that's a good change for sure. This card will also make Alphys more playable. However, this is a legendary card. I don't want to consider it that much because I am a low level account, but this change is for better, that's for sure. The other change is Ban, and this is where it's interesting because it got just its cost decreased and its stats pretty much stayed the same. We have also a ban nerf in here, but that's nothing because this card just became a lot stronger and it actually has its use cases. This is just a filler and I gave you an explanation above. This change should make Flower Jar playable, however plants are dead and you don't really want to play Flower Jar outside of plants, so it's pretty much a filler as well. Childrake made this card better, a lot better, and it made this card playable in some like Zoo decks maybe. I don't know how to call Inflation. It's like a combo deck and a Zoo deck and in some cases even an aggro deck, but I have a list for this card and we may be using it in the future. Also we have another plant change, but plants are dead as I've also already mentioned that, so we won't be discussing this too much. Yeah, the cost reduction is of course very significant for this card, but the fact that plants are dead doesn't change anything for it. Also the next one is Chessboard, and Chessboard got a significant cost reduction, and now Chessboard actually benefits the pieces because it costs much less than all the other pieces, and I can tell you that pieces got a huge buff, but that's still not enough for them because the reason for this is you don't usually have Chessboard in your starting hand. When you have Chessboard in your starting hand, that's nice and that's the best tempo Zoo deck when you have Chessboard in your hand, but when you don't, it just turns into some weaker version of Dogs or something like that, or maybe weaker version of Frogits, because it's just pure stats and the effects are not significant enough to be carried without Chessboard, and we don't have a card to draw Chessboard early, so it's pretty much a dead tribe. Of course it's worth using and I may show a deck with pieces later because it's a budget deck and it's a deck for kindness that got buffed, so it may have some use cases, but I can tell you after some days of playing that pieces just don't have enough and they still need some buffs. So now let's move on to nerfs and then consider some revokes. For nerfs it's pretty much the same as for buffs, but nerfs are usually made on cards that are playable. You know, you buff unplayable cards, nerf playable and very strong cards, but yeah, you should better nerf something like very OP cards, overpowered cards, not something like playable cards. But that's a problem, a general problem of Undercards balance. Now let's just look at them. Bookshelf got an HP nerf, which doesn't mean anything for it, because the problem with Bookshelf is it generates pretty broken spells which are useless when they are put into your deck, because they are not worth a deck slot. Now it has the same problem, the same spell set problem, general Undercards problem, but now it's just a bit weaker, didn't change anything for it, so I prefer this card not change it. Okay, moving on, we have Ban nerf, which is a needed nerf, because Ban got a buff. This small nerf is needed, so that it didn't become really OP. Magic Crystal is just a random filler nerf, because we have this change, and we understand that the crystal combinations got murdered, and this change is not really needed. Those are some random buffs, random nerfs, you know, just like average undercuts patch. Some rarity changes which don't really matter, and we will skip them. And now we have some spells, buffs, which are actually a joke one, because it only targets your own face. And this one, which is a spell buff for Alphys as a Patience, but Patience is still dead, so that's also not that important. Now let's get back to the revokes. Usually very strong cards get a revoke so that they became dead, or some very weak useless cards get revoked so that they could become potentially playable. So let's take a look in here. Dark Pawnman is just a straight buff because it was pretty much a very bad card. Now it's better, okay. Orange Laser became a really strong card. It's not like it has its use cases right now because all the other tempo support cards are weaker than they have to be, so Orange Laser is just a card for the future, a card from recruitment. It's cool that it got this buff, it makes it at least playable, but it's not for now for sure. The next card is just a murder. This was a very strong card for Frogit, for Magic Crystal. It could be potentially a card for pieces support, because chessboard is a rarity, so they could just make some cards from here, common cards or epic cards, and just leave chessboard as a rare card. You could draw it easily, but instead ICE mascot got murdered, and when a card like this gets murdered, you shouldn't even pay attention to the effect, because it's usually just a filler effect, just to forget about this card for ages. And the effect of this card really turned out to be a filler effect, so we won't even be considering this. Let's move on. And this is also a very interesting change, because it affected a single deck in the whole game, and the deck is Lauren OTK. Of course, this card is still pretty good. It is good in some aggro, zone, tempo decks, something like that. It is still extremely good. Now it has Taunt, which is even better than Haste in most cases, especially when it got 2 HP instead of 1 HP. And it's better for all the decks except for the mentioned Lauren OTK, or just aggro Lauren Perseverance. And of course it also got worse for Perseverance in general. So that's pretty much a change that doesn't change anything, but it changed the fact that Laurens were playable. Now they are much worse, however, I still going to use them if they are not nerfed in the mid-season, and I'm going to show you at least a bit later. Now let's move to some more very useful cards changes. This is Totem this time. It is still a pretty bad card because we have no soul that really supports this playstyle. We have Integrity that just gains additional gold, but you can spend that gold on whatever you want. And if we had an old Integrity that gained gold for playing 6 gold or 5 gold monsters, that would be maybe a playable card. Now it is useless, and we move on to the next change, which is Cheese Tutorial, and it's a very funny change. Just for some combo decks, crazy combo decks. That's a good change. When we have something that was dead and it turned into something like a fun fuel, fun decks fuel, fun combos fuel, that's generally good, because that's just some space for your deck building, space for some crazy stupid combos, and that's just card like this, so we won't consider it because it's a legendary, and it's not for us, for sure, not for this account, but overall it's just very funny card. Let's just skip it. Now we have Candy Dish Revoke. Candy was the problem, it wasn't. That's a spoiler, but it got changed. Now it's a very strong vanilla card with effect. It can be played in Integrity, for instance in Inflation Integrity together with where is it? Leggy TV, because it's 4 gold, 3-8 crazy stats, and it's really, it will find its place sometime, maybe even this patch, next patch, doesn't matter. It's still pretty good to have some very strong vanilla cards, especially strong in HP, which means it can be buffed and become even stronger. It's a very interesting card. And Boogie Pants got deleted from the game for some reason. I really like the concept of Boogie Pants, and it should just get some buffs, maybe some effect buff, but instead it just got murdered, nerfed. I can tell you what this actually is. That's some random effect. It's not playable anywhere because we don't have some support for this, and it's just some new funny card to get from recruitment. If you want to get this card from recruitment, actually, I'm not sure about that. It's just a card, let it stay. We won't be considering this. And now we get to the most interesting and most important part of the update, which is balancing souls. So this are stated as revoks, but I can tell you for sure that kindness is a buff and justice is a straight nerf. So kindness now procs both its passive effects from turn 3, which means less heal against aggro at the start of the game, but that's just -2 heal, so that doesn't matter. But at the same time you start buffing your monster a bit earlier, and if that's an armor monster, then it's actually stronger than it used to be. So kindness got a buff, and now kindness and integrity are the 2 most oppressive souls in the game. That's just because they don't have some restriction on their effect, unlike the new Justice. Effect update, turn end, deal 1 damage to random damaged enemy monster. So, you may think that nothing changed for Justice, because it was a deal soul, a deal Justice soul, and it still is a deal Justice soul, but the fact is that your passive doesn't trigger not only at the start of the game, but also during the mid game. Sometimes you used to skip some turns against a full board just to set up your Asgore, just to set up some deal cards of yours. You could just skip a turn and use Cisa Dancer the next turn, and now you can't. Now you have to play something first, which is Fuku, Vulcan, etc., and only then your passive will trigger, which is extremely bad. Justice got a huge nerf, and this nerf should change the problematic matchup of Justice and any aggro, because you could just skip turns and your passive shot the aggro, but there is still the issue that Justice can kill the aggro deck using Strafe, and it's still very strong against aggro, but of course it became a lot weaker against any other archetype, against any other deck, and that's really bad for Justice. Well, it's bad and sad, and I can tell you that the 2 strongest souls are now Integrity and Kindness. Why so? Because they benefit from skipping turns. And now the tireless deck is probably Integrity followers, because you can skip several turns, get some face damage, and then fully heal using your Prosperity artifact with some very expensive cards, because nothing can kill you before that, since aggro still doesn't have enough, and Justice got absolutely destroyed, because when you play a Justice against followers, it is still a good matchup for you. However, when you play as Justice against any 25 random cards deck, that's extremely weak pick for you as a soul. So Justice is now pretty much dead. And the last and the most absurd change of the patch is power, and Toulon didn't read, it just got delayed by 1 turn. Why this was made, that's a mystery for me. Now you have to remember that the strongest choice for any deck is draw and poke, not draw and power, or not poke and power, because power is just too slow now. You won't be triggering all the effects on it, especially when you're playing some Tempo or Zoo deck, that doesn't matter much. So now your absolute choice for tempo decks is draw and poke. Is this draws and pokes problem? I guess not. That's the problem, that Power got a random murder. So, that's all about the patch. Now, once we finish it, we usually get to deck building, but that's going to be the next video. I'm going to play some games before mid-season, show you some interesting decks, which are hopefully not deleted until mid-season, and I'm going to show you how to counter that infinite skipper or infinite skip decks, and how to actually adapt to the changes, since these changes really have a strong influence on all the decks that I've showed you before. So, good luck, stay for more videos, share this video, leave a like, and I'm going to be back very soon. Goodbye, guys.